She wasn't on the flight roster. Could one choice turn her from outcast to hero? She wasn't cleared for takeoff. In fact, she wasn't even supposed to be near the cockpit. But when the distress call came from the mountains and everyone else backed away, she made a choice that could have ended her career or saved lives. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of courage move you, we'd be honored to have you subscribe. The wind slid across the tarmac like a blade, low and cold, stirring grit and frost beneath the early light. It wasn't snowing yet, but the clouds above the base were dense and metallic, the kind of gray that meant something heavier was coming. Inside the hangar, the clatter of tools and clipped conversation echoed in sharp bursts. But one figure moved quietly through it all, unnoticed. She carried a clipboard and a data tablet, her steps light, her eyes fixed on the tail number of the helicopter in front of her. She double-checked the sensor readout, typed in a few corrections, then clicked her pen once before stepping back. Her uniform was the same olive drab as the others, but without any wings sewn above the chest pocket. Her name tag read S. Reyes and below it, nothing else. Most of the young crew on duty didn't even glance her way. She wasn't one of the pilots, just a technician. Flight support. One of those people you only notice when the equipment breaks. "Hey, Reyes," called out a young lieutenant near the tool bench. He tossed a wrench onto the table and smirked. "You ever think about flying one of these for real?" She didn't look up. "Just making sure you don't fall out of the sky." That earned a few chuckles. Not cruel exactly, but sharp enough to cut. The joke was old. It had been circling the hangar like a lazy hawk for over a year now. She was good at her job. The kind of good that meant the birds came back fueled, calibrated, and whisper smooth on descent. But she wasn't one of them. She kept her head down, stayed late, and answered only when spoken to. There were stories about her, whispers that never quite made it to words. One of the senior officers had once looked at her and gone silent mid-sentence. Another had offered her a different base assignment after barely a month of her arrival. She'd turned it down without explanation. There was something in her posture that warned people not to ask. Outside, the low rumble of an incoming bird signaled the return of a routine patrol. She stepped back from the aircraft and watched as the chopper touched down with precision, kicking up a halo of dust. The pilot climbed out, stretching his back, nodding in her direction without recognition. She waited until he disappeared into the command office before returning to her inspection logs. Inside the base's operations center, the morning briefing had just ended. A storm front was pushing through the eastern peaks and flight operations would be limited for at least 48 hours. All non-essential flights were grounded. Medevac operations would require regional approval. The words came out of the commanding officer's mouth with mechanical precision. No one questioned them. She signed off on the maintenance forms and walked to the back office to file the records. The room was quiet, full of archive boxes and cabinets labeled in thick black ink. On the far wall hung a weathered photograph, glass cracked slightly in one corner. It showed a flight crew in full gear, standing in front of a Blackhawk, faces bright and squinting under the sun. At the edge of the photo, almost cropped out, was a familiar silhouette, shorter than the rest, helmet under one arm, eyes unreadable. She stared at it for a moment too long before returning the file to its drawer. A breath caught in her throat, but she let it go without a sound. Outside, the wind picked up again. A warning siren sounded briefly in the distance. Routine weather alert. Reyes walked back toward the hangar, crossing paths with two young mechanics. They stepped aside without a word. She heard one of them murmur something behind her. Something about ghosts walking in daylight. She didn't respond. At lunch, she sat alone. Same table, same corner. She picked at a ration pack without much interest. The television in the mess hall played a loop of weather forecasts, satellite footage of the storm mass growing darker by the hour. A medic walked by and offered a nod. She returned it faintly. The medic lingered. "You used to fly, right?" he asked. Her fork paused over the tray. "Used to," she replied. "Guessing you miss it." She didn't answer. He didn't press. When she finished eating, she went back to the hangar. There was always work to do, always something that needed adjusting, testing, refining. She preferred the silence of the machines to the weight of conversations. They didn't ask questions. They didn't remember. She ran diagnostics on a scout chopper that hadn't been flown in a week. The flight log had a red mark on the last entry, a note about gyroscopic drift. She tightened a valve, recalibrated the HUD, and logged the fix. As she stepped down from the cabin, she noticed a group of pilots walking by, laughing about something she couldn't hear. One of them, a lieutenant named Haynes, caught her eye and gave a quick nod. He was new, barely out of school, but not cruel like the others. "You're wasting your talent here," he said in passing. She blinked, startled by the honesty. "Maybe," she replied. Then he was gone. By late afternoon, the wind had gotten worse. Low cloud cover choked the valley and the peaks were vanishing under thick veils of mist. The alert board in the command center showed 2 civilian requests for aerial assistance denied due to weather conditions. One military flight had diverted to a secondary base across the ridge. Everything else was grounded. Reyes stood near the hangar door, watching the sky shift. She could read the weather better than most. The storm would stall over the mountains. It would lock down everything for at least another day, maybe 2. Anyone caught out in that would be stranded. She returned to her workstation and checked the system logs. Everything green, every bird on standby. Flight control status, restricted. She stared at those words, her fingers brushing the edge of the screen. A flicker of something stirred in her chest. A loud voice called out from across the room. "Reyes, you hear the latest?" It was Lieutenant Rohr, the one who liked to talk loud and walk louder. He grinned. "One of the brass from HQ just asked if we had any backup for storm medevac. Told him we just send you up." The room laughed. Reyes looked up slowly, eyes level. Rohr's grin wavered. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned back to her work, methodically scrolling through flight metrics. "Just a joke," he muttered. She checked the time. 16:42 hours. The wind howled against the side of the hangar. Somewhere deep in the mountains, it was already night. At 1700 hours, a crackling voice burst through the emergency channel. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Blackbird 2. We are going down. Grid 9 Echo. Repeat. 9. Echo. Rotor failure. 3 injured on board. 1 critical. Request immediate assistance." The room went silent. The operations officer grabbed the nearest comlink. "Blackbird 2, confirm your position. We are tracking. Weather grid is unstable. Medevac response limited. Hold position. Negative. No cover. Weather is worsening. Need evacuation. Medical urgent. Repeat. Urgent." The command team clustered around the terminal. Grid 9. Echo was deep in the mountains. No roads, no ground access. Visibility near zero. The commander stepped forward. "We have no cleared flights. Weather's not opening for hours." One of the pilots said, "We wait. There's nothing we can do until then." Will this silence cost lives? Reyes stood at the edge of the room, her hands behind her back. She listened as the voices shifted from alarm to resignation. She saw it happening. Saw it like a pattern repeating. The storm, the radio, the indecision, lives bleeding out behind a wall of policy. She stepped forward. "I'll take it." The room turned to her. "What?" said the commander. "I can fly it. I know that route. I know that bird. You're not cleared." She met his eyes. "Neither is anyone else. You haven't flown in. I've run diagnostics on every chopper in this hangar. I've memorized the terrain. I've flown that bird before, sir." Someone scoffed. Another muttered under their breath. The commander frowned. Reyes, this isn't your call to make. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small key on a chain. It was old, worn, and not supposed to exist anymore. She held it up. This key starts Eagle, too. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the younger officers stepped back. She was on the Santoro mission, he whispered. Another pilot's face turned pale. The commander looked at her, the weight of a decision pressing hard. If you fail, I won't. Silence held for a breath, then another. Finally, he nodded once. You've got 30 minutes. She turned and walked toward the hangar, her pace steady. Behind her, the operations room buzzed to life, voices rising, orders called. Mechanics scrambled to prep Eagle 2. One of them looked at her and paused. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked. She climbed into the cockpit, flipping switches like old muscle memory. No one asked. The storm greeted her like an old adversary. As the helicopter cleared the edge of the base and lifted into the bruised sky, the first gusts pushed back against the rotors, testing the machine's resolve. Reyes tightened her grip on the controls, her jaw locked in focus. Eagle 2 responded well, humming with purpose beneath her. She'd known this bird intimately before everything fell apart. Even now, years later, it still felt like part of her. The calm line buzzed with static and occasional updates. The operations center relayed patches of weather turbulence and warnings about low visibility, but Reyes barely needed the guidance. She had studied every inch of the mountain grid. Her mind mapped the terrain in detail. Every cliff edge, every blind pass, every whisper-thin corridor carved between ridgelines. She flew not with fear, but with precision, and an edge sharpened by time away from the sky. Inside the base, the mood shifted from disbelief to stunned silence. They had expected her to back down or fail the pre-flight. Instead, she had climbed into Eagle 2 like she had never left it, like her name still sat on the manifest and not buried in forgotten reports. Several officers stood near the main terminal, watching her telemetry trace a clean ascent into worsening conditions. The commander folded his arms tightly, eyes narrowed. How long has she been off flight status? Asked a younger pilot. 2 years, the commander replied. She was blamed for that crash, right? A long pause followed. Then he said, that's what the paperwork says. Reyes had climbed past 6,000 feet, the wind howling louder now, throwing sheets of sleet across the canopy. She toggled the defoggers and pulled her goggles down tighter. The signal from Blackbird 2 came in faint and flickering, but she caught enough to confirm their location. Grid 9. Echo was a pocket between two mountain ridges with limited glide room and virtually no emergency landing zone. Blackbird 2, this is Eagle 2 inbound. Hold tight. You are not alone. There was a pause, then a garbled voice crackled back. Eagle 2, copy. Stabilizing critical, losing pressure. Visuals nil. Please hurry. She dipped low and banked hard to the west, navigating by sheer instinct and memory. The clouds swallowed the chopper whole and visibility dropped to near nothing. But her hand stayed steady, correcting for drift, anticipating each gust before it hit. She didn't fight the wind. She moved with it, letting it curve around the rotors until she could feel the mountain breathing beneath her. In the cabin behind her, medical packs were strapped in tight. She had loaded them herself. There had been no time to bring a crew, and even if there was, no one had volunteered. This was a solo flight in every sense. Just her, the storm, and the knowledge that 3 people were waiting for her arrival, hoping someone would come when the odds said otherwise. The weather worsened as she approached the drop zone. The terrain sloped sharply on both sides, creating a funnel of violent air that rattled the controls. Rain mixed with sleet, freezing against the glass. Alarms began to ping softly in her headset, warning of altitude drift and rotor strain. She acknowledged them with a calm flick of switches and slowed her speed. As she edged into the narrow valley, she saw them, just a shadow at first, then shapes. The wreckage of Blackbird 2 leaned sideways on a rocky incline, its tail sheared off, one rotor bent. Smoke trailed into the sky from a small fire that had been half extinguished by the storm. One soldier stood waving a flare in tight circles, the light barely cutting through the haze. Reyes descended carefully, adjusting for downdraft and debris. There was no proper landing space, only a flattened outcrop maybe 2 m wide. She steadied the chopper, coaxing it down with absolute control, and managed a toe-down landing just close enough for rescue. The injured were already strapped and ready. The standing soldier helped load the first two, both conscious but pale. The third was on a stretcher, unmoving, with a field bandage pressed hard to his abdomen. Reyes climbed out into the storm long enough to help secure the stretcher, her gloves freezing instantly against the cold metal. Once they were inside, she shouted over the wind, "Tell command you're secured. Strap in tight." The soldier gave a shaky nod, then grabbed the internal columns. Reyes climbed back in, closed the door, and pulled the chopper away from the mountain wall. As she lifted, a gust slammed the tail, spinning the bird slightly off-center. Her breath caught. She leveled the rotors and powered forward, the frame rattling with strain. For a second, the instrument panel flashed a warning about rotor drag. She adjusted again, shifting weight, and the signal cleared. Back at base, the room held still as her signal dipped, then stabilized again. "She's got them," one of the comm officers said quietly. "Unbelievable," whispered someone else. "Is she going to make it back? Can she defy the storm one more time?" The commander didn't answer. In the air, Reyes leaned into the wind, her focus absolute. The route back would be even more dangerous with the added weight and worsening visibility. She rerouted through a secondary pass, one that curved wide around the western slope, but was lower and more shielded from crosswinds. It would add 10 minutes to the flight, but gave her the best shot at avoiding ice buildup on the rotors. The soldiers in the back stayed quiet, holding on to the straps like lifelines. One of them muttered a prayer. Another simply stared at the back of Reyes' helmet, eyes wide, as if seeing something he couldn't quite process. Halfway through the return, the storm surged again. Rain turned to sleet, and the left side sensor started blinking red, ice accumulation. She activated the heating system, monitored the engine temps, and gradually increased power to keep the lift consistent. Her breathing stayed slow, controlled. This wasn't her first time flying through something like this. The difference was that last time she had followed orders and someone had died. She wasn't following anyone's orders now. She cleared the ridge just as the outer marker of the base came into view. The landing pad lit up below, a line of vehicles and medics waiting. The tower cleared her in with immediate priority. She brought Eagle 2 down smooth and steady, the skids touching pavement with a clean bounce. As soon as the rotors slowed, medics rushed forward. The side door opened, stretchers unloaded. The critically wounded soldier was transferred within seconds. The others climbed out under their own strength, supported by the medical team. One of them looked back at Reyes. "Thank you," he mouthed. She nodded once. Inside the operations center, no one spoke. The screens showed the successful landing, the names of the rescued, the medical teams responding. The commander turned from the window and stared at the silent crowd of officers. "You all saw it," he said. "She brought them home." Reyes stayed in the cockpit for a moment longer, the sound of the rain on the windshield like static. Her hands rested in her lap, unmoving until the engine completely shut down. Then she climbed out and stepped onto the tarmac. The air was different, still cold, still sharp, but somehow quieter. People stood nearby, watching her. She walked past them toward the hangar without speaking. No one stopped her. No one laughed. Later, footage from the body cam of the rescued soldiers surfaced. The clip showed the moment the helicopter broke through the clouds. Rotors slicing through rain, descending like a shadow through the mist. The light of the flare reflecting off the hull. One of the soldiers said something just before the shot faded to static. "I thought angels had wings." The video went viral within the base network. It didn't go public. Too many security layers. But every squad and unit on that base saw it. And every single one of them knew her name. The next morning, Reyes returned to the hangar. She wore the same jacket, same boots. Her name tag still read the same. She moved through the tools and diagnostics like she always had. But something was different. Pilots stepped aside when she passed. One of them saluted, not out of protocol, out of respect. She nodded in return. The commander walked up to her later that day with a sealed envelope. Inside was a notice of reinstatement. Her flight status was no longer suspended. The last line of the form read, "Status cleared for active duty." He didn't speak when he handed it to her, just gave a quiet nod and walked away. She stood there for a long time, the paper in her hand, fingers brushing the edge. Then she folded it neatly and slid it into her pocket. That evening, long after most of the base had gone quiet, she returned to Eagle 2. The hangar lights buzzed faintly overhead. She stepped into the cockpit and sat down, running her fingers over the controls. Everything was exactly as she had left it. She leaned back in the seat, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. Outside, the storm had passed. The sun rose over the ridge the next morning, its light spreading slowly across the airfield, melting the ice left behind by the storm. The clouds were still thick on the horizon, but the worst had passed. A damp hush settled over the base, the kind that followed a long night filled with too many close calls. Snowmelt trickled down from the hangar roofs. The rotor blades of grounded helicopters glinted in the morning light. Reyes arrived just after dawn. Her uniform was the same as always. No ceremony, no medals, no change in how she walked or carried herself. But the way people looked at her had shifted. Heads turned as she passed. Conversations paused, then resumed with softer tones. She didn't acknowledge any of it, not because she didn't notice, but because she knew none of it was permanent. Respect earned in the sky only mattered if it was backed by consistency on the ground. She stepped into the hangar, clipboard in hand, and ran a pre-check on Eagle 2. Everything was intact. Maintenance crews had already cleaned and refueled the bird after the rescue. The diagnostics read clean, the systems reported green. It was flight ready, just like her. Later that morning, a meeting was called in the Central Command briefing room. Everyone was expected to attend. Word had spread fast. Something official was happening, and it had her name all over it. Reyes stood in the back, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the wall screen as it showed aerial footage from the flight recorder. The grainy clip displayed her approach into Grid 9 Echo, the violent weather, the narrow descent. Next came the bodycam footage from the rescue team, capturing her chopper appearing through the storm, balancing on an edge of rock just long enough to pull out 3 injured soldiers. The room was quiet throughout the entire presentation. No interruptions, no side conversations. When the video ended, the base commander stepped forward. He carried a small box in his hands and paused before speaking. "I want to be clear about what happened here. We were grounded. Every pilot here followed orders. That was not cowardice. That was policy. That was risk management. And sometimes that's what saves lives." He paused, then turned toward her. "But yesterday, someone decided that saving lives was more important than protecting rules. Sergeant Reyes, you took a risk we didn't authorize, a risk we weren't prepared for. But it saved lives. 3 of our own are alive today because of what you did." He opened the box and lifted out a pair of pilot wings, silver and polished. "For too long, we allowed the wrong version of your story to stand. That ends today." He crossed the room and handed her the wings. She looked at them in silence. Her hands didn't shake. She reached out and accepted them with a quiet nod, then pinned them to her chest without ceremony. The symbol gleamed softly in the overhead light. No applause followed, just stillness. A different kind of recognition, not loud, not forced, but real. After the meeting, she stepped outside into the cold morning air. The breeze carried the scent of jet fuel and pine. She stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching as 2 helicopters lifted off for a routine patrol. One of the pilots tipped his nose slightly in her direction. A small gesture, but one she noticed. A familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Looks better on you than a clipboard." It was Lieutenant Haynes. He leaned against the railing, a coffee cup in his hand. Didn't think I'd see that day, he said, nodding at the wings. I didn't think anyone was looking, she replied. They weren't, but they are now. She looked back at the flight line. You flying today? He asked. Not yet. Just making sure the machines still run. He hesitated, then added, if they're assigning partners, I'd fly with you anytime. She offered a rare smile, one that faded quickly, but lingered long enough to register. Inside the base, talk had shifted. People spoke her name with a different tone, not out of curiosity, but with respect. The rumors that once followed her had been replaced by something else. Her record, once marked by a disciplinary review and suspension, had been amended. Not erased, just corrected. Her file now included a commendation for valor in high-risk rescue. It didn't change the past, but it acknowledged it properly. Reyes didn't celebrate. She didn't take the rest of the day off or gather with others in the mess hall. She went back to work, reviewed logs, ran checks, monitored weather updates. The sky was always watching, and she had learned the hard way what happened when people got too comfortable with second chances. A week later, she was assigned to her first official flight since reinstatement, a supply run to an observation post near the glacier shelf. Straightforward, short distance, no passenger pickup. But the entire hangar crew gathered for pre-flight just to watch her walk across the tarmac. She climbed into the pilot seat, adjusted the harness, and ran through the checklist with exact precision. The co-pilot was new to the base, nervous, barely said a word until they were in the air. Is it true what they said about what happened last year? He asked. She didn't look over. What did they say? That you weren't responsible, that you warned them. I did, but they blamed you anyway. She watched the horizon. Sometimes people need someone to blame. Sometimes people need time to understand what they missed. He nodded slowly. Still doesn't seem fair. It wasn't, but I'm still here. They landed without issue. The drop went smoothly. As they lifted back into the air, the co-pilot said, I'm glad they gave your wings back. She replied softly, I didn't wait for them to give them back. I just took the bird up. That night, the base mess hall was unusually full. Someone had played the body cam clip again, this time with commentary from the medics. They described how the storm seemed to split when her chopper arrived. How the rotor wash created a window of calm. How one of the wounded soldiers had whispered, we were saved the moment they saw the bird. Reyes wasn't there to hear it. She sat in the hangar alone, polishing tools and finishing her logs. A junior mechanic entered holding a small notebook. Hey, Sergeant Reyes, mind if I ask something? She looked up. My sister's trying to join flight school. She keeps getting nervous about not fitting in. Said people like her don't get picked, that it's not worth the fight. Reyes considered this for a moment. Tell her that it's not about being picked, she said. It's about knowing what you can do and being ready when no one else is. The mechanic nodded. She'd like that. A few days later, a framed photograph appeared on the wall inside the hangar office. It was an update of the old crew photo that had hung there, the one with the cracked glass and faded names. This new version included the Santoro mission flight team with Reyes now centered and clearly visible. Below the frame, a brass plate read, Flight Sergeant Sarah Reyes cleared for duty, courage, and silence. There was no unveiling, no speech, just a quiet update that everyone noticed. By the end of the month, Reyes had logged over 20 hours of flight time, all clean, all textbook. Her evaluations noted precision, adaptability, and exceptional terrain navigation under pressure. But beyond the numbers, something else had shifted. The younger crew began to ask her questions. The older ones nodded when she entered a room. She still didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. One evening near the edge of dusk, she stood beside Eagle 2 as the maintenance crew finished securing it for the night. The sky was clear, the wind calm. She looked out over the mountains, the same peaks that had once held her down in memory. Now they looked different, not smaller, but less impossible. Someone approached quietly from behind. Thinking of going up again, asked the commander. Always, she said. He handed her a new patch. It bore the symbol of a hawk in flight, wings flared wide. "We had these made for the rescue team." The others agreed. "This one's yours." She took it, ran her thumb over the threads. "Thank you," she said. "You earned it twice." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Reyes, the decision to ground you back then wasn't mine, but I didn't speak against it either." "I should have." She nodded once. "You're speaking now?" He left her with that. The patch found a place on her flight jacket. Not loud, not flashy, just another part of the uniform that meant something only to those who knew the story behind it. That night, the base quieted early. Lights dimmed, engines cooled, but inside the hangar, a soft light remained where she sat beside Eagle 2, reviewing charts for the next day's flight. Her pen moved slowly across the page, careful and precise. Outside, a single star broke through the cloud cover, gleaming faintly above the ridge. The kind of star that didn't need recognition to shine. It just did. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? If you have, share their story below. We'd be honored to hear it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, consider subscribing. You're among good company. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories so you don't miss the Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where quiet strength is celebrated, and every hero story finds a voice.